Hello. Today, our topic is redefining psychicism, spiritual support with integrity. And here I have with me today Marissa Ramsey. She's a professional psychic and medium who weaves together mysticism, spirituality, and science through her understanding of the quantum field. Marissa received her doctorate of psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology. Throughout her psychic development journey, she's worked with several mentors and developmental groups. She finds that she learns best when she studies with her own intuition and with the spirit realm. She's taken everything she's learned throughout her journey, from a psychologist to a psychic medium, to support other empaths and budding psychics to understand and develop their gifts from a trauma-informed, grounded, and foundational approach. So welcome, Marissa. I'm going to share a little bit about why this topic is important, and then I can't wait to have you introduce yourself and share why it's important to you.
Absolutely.
So, to me, why this is so important is that I have transitioned from health coach to spiritual coach. And in that 15 years or more of searching in between, I fell in and out of different mentorships myself. And I got really steeped in psychicism in about 2012. And I went down a rabbit hole of contacting different psychic hotlines, different psychic mentors. I learned to read tarot cards and was actually working on a psychic hotline for a little while. And what I found was that it became super toxic for me and for my clients. And as I've kind of witnessed and been part of this, I will call it coaching industry, I see that there's a lot of brainwashing. Maybe it's unintentional, but a lot of spirituality these days can be super psychic and super disempowering. It keeps people reaching outside of themselves, and it kind of creates a loop of hierarchy and a loop of conditioning of what's real and what isn't, and keeping people kind of out of reality and with their head in the clouds and truly in a space of unhealed woundedness. So I'm so excited to have you here today because you have the credentials of academic study, you have the experience of mysticism firsthand, and most importantly, what I found through our few interactions is that you have immense integrity in this space. So I'm so excited today to offer you to my listeners to hear about this from a more grounded, empirical space and with a mindset that we can use this to empower people, not keep dragging people through the addictive process of seeking outside of themselves.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. And you said all of that so beautifully. Hello, everybody. My name is Marissa. As Becca mentioned, I am a professional psychic medium, and I help others to develop their intuitive psychic gifts. So, you asked, why is this important to me? Why is this topic important to me? And it's a lot of what you mentioned. I myself, the reason why this is so important to me is because I also fell into this loophole of really like this disempowered state. I come from a background of trauma myself, which many of the people who find themselves in coaching positions or healers, that's what has drawn them to this area of work to help other people because of what they've been through. And I noticed when I started my spiritual awakening, it was very ungrounding. And actually, what I needed was to be in my body, processing all of the things that I had been through. And so, as I started to develop my gifts, I started going to development groups and working with different people. And it was like, this doesn't feel right to me. Like, this just feels icky. Like you said, it just feels kind of toxic to me. And so, I slowly started to kind of break free from that toxicness of psychicism and of mediumship and of the development world, and started to kind of really start learning from the spirit realm and really start learning from plant medicine. And then it kind of all just started to infuse together with my background in psychology and trauma-informed work and nervous system regulation. And it's so important to me for two reasons. The first one being, when we are working psychically, we can really empower ourselves. Like you can really empower somebody when you are appropriately and in integrity, giving them the things that they need to support their body, their quantum field, in their energy system. And the second thing is that we are all magical beings. We are all tuned in psychic. We all have this ability to seek inside first, to seek our psychic senses first. But we live in a conditioned culture that teaches us to seek outside of self first, to use medication, to go to the doctor, all of these things that are still very important, but that we can use our psychicism with to help and support us so that we're not constantly seeking and seeking and seeking. And so for that reason, both of those things is what makes this so, so important to me.
I love that description. And, I think the difference between psychicism with integrity and with disempowerment is, are you, as a practitioner, supporting the client to learn themselves and to develop it for themselves? And so I think with the psychic industry, it tends to be, come to me for a reading and you get a fix. And so what do you think, because you shared that everybody has this, what do you think is holding people back from being aware of it? Whether it's, personal denial, personal fear, whether it's familial or cultural. Can you speak a little bit about how it began to be this kind of ethereal idea, this nonsensical idea? Was there ever a time where society embraced it, or has it always been this fringe topic?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's multifaceted. So I'm going to share a bunch of different kind of viewpoints from it. I think if we look at this from kind of like an ancestral, ancient perspective, like back to the Mayans, the Egyptians, Atlantis, Lemuria, these sorts of cultures, psychicism was wildly infused. Like that was the basis of these cultures: connection to the earth, connection to the land, connection to the quantum field and their spiritual gifts. Like that's how they navigated life, right? And so it was very, very wildly accepted back in these times. And then we start kind of getting to things like the Salem witch trials in the 1500s, and more in the 1400s and 1500s, when these sorts of gifts were really condemned. Like it was really satanic to be this way. And this sort of witch wound, I just posted about this on Instagram yesterday, this witch wound that resides in our collective energy field is so large. The fear that is that envelops this witch wound, that we also see being pushed by conservative Christianity and different things like that, different patriarchal structures within our society, that says that you're crazy if you do this, or you're schizophrenic, and all of these sorts of things. And so it's that societal conditioning for a lot of people. A lot of people start their psychic journey thinking like only special people have these gifts, right? Like I can't talk to dead people, only mediums and psychics can do that. And so when I started to awaken and develop my gifts, it was really important to me to teach people that it wasn't only special people that had these gifts. And unfortunately, I've seen early on in my journey, I've seen other mediums, professional mediums, who will say that it's just them that they're gifted, right? Like it's just certain people that are gifted with this. And so that narrative gets pushed into the societal conditioning of this, along with the societal conditioned fear. And then of course this person's own values and beliefs, right? Like what they value and believe about the spiritual realm and psychicism. And so I find, and what's coming through right now too, is this narrative of I'm not psychic, only somebody else could be psychic, not me, pushes that narrative of like, I need to seek outside of self because I could never use this gift. I could never be psychic. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. When I think of toxic new age spirituality and like what I got kind of steeped into and what never felt true to me, and today I just kind of hold a neutrality, but almost a deep skepticism too. So maybe neutrality is not the accurate word. These ideas of starseeds and Lemuria and past life, what I've found is that I'm not really sure if it's real or not, but it feels like those people who are coming from a wounded place and just want to feel like they fit in or want to feel special, attached to that. And then what it does is it keeps them out of body, out of their out of 3D reality, and can almost facilitate more mental illness, more mental imbalance. So when I first found out about these concepts, I thought I wasn't, tapped in enough or woke enough because it never made sense to me. And so this is kind of a sensitive topic because I don't have any data to say it's true or not, but through any past life regression I have, I always left feeling like, that didn't really feel authentic. Or, with the whole starseed thing, people would look at me like I was crazy if I talked about that. So it always felt like it was disassociating. It wasn't actually grounding me into my body and into my nervous system. And so I'd like you to both talk about those, starseed and past life, if you're comfortable, and also this piece of like the value of it. Like, because what I tell people is I'm not here to tell you if it's true or not, but what's the purpose? Like, is it helpful? Is it keeping you present? When I have been more believing of it, I've thought that past lives were almost concurrent. Like it's just an energetic metaphor and it's just different parts of you, less than like, oh, I was this person. And when I hear people often talk about it, it sounds like a superiority thing or like, I'm so special. And I think that the spiritual narcissism comes from having felt really left out. And so it's exciting for me to hear you say that everybody has these gifts, because actually coming to this call, I hadn't had that perspective because I have, an astrological background. And so knowing that some people are just super grounded in this present earth, and it's just not a tendency they have to really like perceive, things off of this planet. And as a child, I was seeing things, hearing things, and I don't get that story from everyone. So I don't want to inundate you, and I'll take a note. But my second question would be, why do some people seem more naturally inclined to it and others, it seems untouchable? So I'll make a note of that, and you feel free to comment in the right time for you.
Yeah, make a note of that because that's also really important. So I want to unpack your first question because there's so many yummy little valuable pieces of things that we can talk about here. And the first thing that I want everybody that's listening to know is that when I teach and when I talk about these concepts, I'm talking about them from a trauma-informed, spiritual, grounded perspective. So I love to weave together these really ethereal, high-dimensional spiritual topics with how we can create this in an embodied, grounded experience, because it's also my experience through a lot of the new age spiritual teachings, like we've been talking about, that it is extremely ungrounding and it can create disassociative feelings, like you were talking about, like the starseed, the past life, the Lemuria, and these sorts of things. And so these things become really, so all of these things are very real things that have occurred. Past lives, depending upon your belief system, right? Like some people don't believe in past lives, but we'll talk about past lives in a second and kind of what they are from an energetic perspective. So I find that these topics like Starseed, Lemuria, Atlantis, when people are using these topics to cover a wound, to cover trauma, and not actually going into the body to move this trauma, to experience this physical plane, this is when we're getting this like really disassociated state, and we're getting that spiritual narcissism, because it's like, well, I'm just, and I see this a little bit like within the sensitive community. It's like, well, I'm just super sensitive and I just absorb everybody's energy and nobody understands me and all of these sorts of things. And I myself, very early on in my journey, went through that, which is why what I teach now, it's like, no, we're not absorbing other people's energy. You're a sensitive being, which often came from a trauma in your childhood that made you super aware of your surroundings so that you could encode and decode everybody's feelings, because likely you had caregivers that weren't communicating to you. And now growing up, you still have this survival mechanism. And so you're sensing and feeling people's energy all the time and then thinking it's yours. And so that's what this kind of like absorbing thing, this super disempowered narrative that empaths and that sensitive people use from kind of like this trauma-informed perspective. And so when we're looking to tie that into starseeds, empaths are starseeds essentially, and starseeds are tied to the galactic realm and the galactic beings of higher dimensions. And so when we're talking about these topics, it's so important for us to still be here in our human form, for us to still be grounding, for us to be grounded in our bodies here and still experiencing this plane, this physical reality, because this is why we're here. This is why we came here. And so we're not coming here to ascend to any higher dimension. We're coming here to experience this 3D density. And it's really, really dense in this 3D density. And so a lot of us want to feel that kind of like higher dimension. We want to come out of our bodies. We want to meditate. We want to astral travel and all of these things. But really, like when we're talking about New Earth, we're talking about weaving all of this together in the grounded form, the unconditional love, this higher frequency in our bodies and in our physical vessels so that we can hold it in here and we can feel it. Like I can feel the pleasure of a higher dimension in my body here and in this now moment, which is why we're seeing an increase in nervous system regulation, because it's what we all need to embody this energy. And the last thing that I want to say just about this topic before I switch to past lives is the most important thing, in my opinion, when we're doing any sort of ethereal work, any sort of higher dimensional work, is that it is doing a disservice to only rely on science and what we can prove. So we have to find a middle ground where we are still grounded in our bodies and we're still feeling like these things resonate with us, but we're also being open to that mystical realm. Because if we're like, oh, I have to have this, I have to be able to prove that Lemuria was here, or that starseeds were here, or that aliens are real, then we're doing a complete disservice to ourselves, because there are a lot of things that we can't see with our physical eyes. And a lot of people have to, that's what I work with a lot of my students, we have to kind of begin to trust ourselves and trust the spirit realm and the higher dimensional beings that we're working with through the embodied grounding process.
That was so beautiful. I loved all the pieces you touched on. So you so artfully described each piece. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
One clarifying question. So you said that everyone has psychic capacity. Are you also saying everyone is a starseed, or not?
So everybody has psychic capacity, and everybody is from a specific galactic origin. So this is where it gets a little kind of hazy here. So empaths are starseeds, and so essentially, yes, everybody to a degree is a starseed, is from a galactic origin. That's from like where their soul is from a galactic. Whether it be the Palladians, the Arcturians, the Lyrans, everybody is from that place. And so starseed is really just like a label that you can use if it resonates with you. You don't have to use it. It's just something that I've seen come within modern spirituality. And I myself, starseed, in these terms like starseeds and light workers, these are things that I have a hard time like feeling in my body that resonate with me, only because my body still ties those things to ungrounded spiritual teachings. And so it's really hard for me to like speak about like light workers and starseeds, because it doesn't feel like a grounded word to me. Like it doesn't feel like it aligns with like my teachings, if that makes sense. But I do know other people that teach that work primarily with starseeds, and that's like their brand, and that's what they use, and they do it in a really grounded, embodied way. For me personally, I think that also that word, I've always felt like it takes away from a lot of like the really ancient teachings, like ancient earthly teachings as well, like Pachamama, Mother Earth, like Native American teachings, and all these sorts of things too. So I find as well, another thing that's coming through is like this word starseed can start to help people who feel misunderstood to start feeling understood, right? To start feeling like, okay, this makes sense. Like, this is why I've never fit in, or, all of these sorts of things. But at the same time, there is trauma work there to be done, right? Like we've got to do that work. We've got to do the body work, the somatic work that's processing. Versus, I loved what you said before, like sometimes the word starseed can make people kind of more disassociated from this human realm, because now it's like you just came out of one place and then like moved to another place, but there's still a lot of trauma here that needs to be moved through. Does that make sense?
It does. And I so appreciate the way that you speak with it with such regard when it's not resonant for you. It's no longer resonant for me. I feel like it's very dismissive of what's really going on and kind of sugarcoats trauma, and sugarcoats deeper work that people need to do to get to know themselves. I found that when people hook onto this term, all of a sudden, oh, I'm a light worker, I'm a starseed, and then everything I read in a book is true, or anything I saw on Instagram is true. And so why I'm so excited about hearing your perspective is that I know that you've deeply thought about this, that you've studied it, that you've practiced it. And so, I enjoy hearing your reverence and regard for what you're witnessing other people choose to use, but also, practically how does it actually apply to personal development, healing, and authentic spirituality. So I love hearing also about the historical aspects. And I think that part of this wave of consciousness is really re-indigenizing and decolonizing. And so bringing back the ancient wisdom is so important to me, and not this new idea of like this star seed. And then, what is the value of even knowing your star seed origin? Because, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, how the hell would you even know? Like, how do we really know that that's real?
Yeah, so this is where we kind of come into this phase of like this understanding in the psychic world where it's like, okay, there are going to be things that do not resonate with me. Like for me as a psychic, and that's because we talked about it, like demons and entities, no, that is a no for me in my psychic realm. That doesn't resonate with the way that I work. I don't believe that a demon can attach itself to you. Super disempowering within the psychic community. I have worked specifically with other mediums and psychics who don't believe, like they don't believe in channeling angels and goddesses and these sorts of things because you can't prove it. I believe in channeling angels and goddesses because, well, I don't channel angels and goddesses in general. I do a lot of work with goddesses, but not so much with angels. And this is where my discernment comes in of like, I know that there are going to be things that I can't prove, right? Like I can't prove that this person is an Arcturian starseed, but what I know is I trust my channel and I trust my guides and the beings that I'm working with. And so what I find, so I don't do, there are tons of people who are like starseed readers, and they'll tell you the origin that you're from, the galactic planet that you're from, and all these sorts of things. And this information can be wildly beneficial if we're weaving it into the physical realm, because what's going to happen is two things. One thing is that when we talk about, if you are working with a psychic who is walking in integrity and a psychic who's not bullshitting you, which we talked about this in one of our calls. I hate to think that there are people out there bullshitting other people, but I know that there are, because that's just life, right? There's always like a balance. If you were working with a psychic who is truly pulling through a past life information for you, or even information from a galactic origin, you're going to feel this in your soul. And what's going to happen is two things. You're going to feel a deep relaxation, like a deep feeling deeply seen and understood. And also it's going to be an energetic activation to you, into your body, of deep remembrance of information, whether that be on a DNA cellular level, or a psychic consciousness level. And so it can be important to know this only if we're weaving it with the now. So like what I mean by that is like an example of this is like, if we're talking with somebody who, let's say that they're very connected to the Arcturians, which are a higher dimensional galactic being, which I'm very connected to. They're some of my primary guides. The Arcturians are a very higher dimensional scientific being. And so they teach a lot about quantum physics. They teach a lot about the quantum realm. A lot of what I teach, I learn from them because they're very, very just knowledgeable about science and math. And so if I'm talking to somebody about this and talking to them, letting them know that they're very connected to the Arcturians, they can begin to connect with the Arcturians to start to understand their energy field, to start to understand their quantum field, to start to understand their human experience from this more quantum way. Does that make sense, the way that I'm saying that?
Yeah. So quick segue. So I played around with Arcturians for one summer, the idea of it. And same with the other concepts. It was like, well, I don't really believe it, but who am I to say it doesn't exist? And what started to happen was some pretty creepy stuff. And so I just
Mm-hmm.
decided, I don't need to find out. And I stopped. But I would, reach out before I go to bed, and I'd say, now's not the time to communicate with me, but I want to hear from you. And I just moved into my house and there was nothing in it. And I heard things dropping in the middle of the night. And I was like, all right, I don't want to go here. And then there was a second experience that week where I swear I heard a chorus of angels singing above my house. Yep. And there was no other cars around, no houses with stereos. I don't know where the sound came from. And I freaked out. And I thought, well, no wonder beings don't come communicate with me. They're afraid to freak me out. But I closed the door. I thought, you know what? I don't know what that is. Maybe it is real, but I'm going to table this for now. So to answer your question about the Arcturians, it still feels a little bit like nonsense to me. And I know enough that it could actually be true. So that's why I appreciate speaking to you, because I think you have integrity. So I'm super curious what your experience is with it.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's so important, and this is one of the reasons why I feel so deeply called to this work, is teaching, doing this from such a deep space of integrity in a slow and controlled manner. Because when we open up to the psychic world, we're not just opening up to the psychic world, we're opening our bodies, we're opening our consciousness to things in which we've not worked with, we've not understood for all of our lives, right? Most of us, depending upon when your awakening was, depending upon your gifts, most of us did not grow up thinking that we could talk to aliens and angels and all of these sorts of things, even though we were able to do this, hundreds of years ago. And so when we start to develop our gifts, it's scary. I was scared shitless. And in fact, when I came out of the psychic medium closet and I had some pushback from my family, I was like, you guys know I'm this most scared person in this world. I jump if you come up to me and you are in the same room. Why would I want to choose to be a medium where there, spirits are coming to me, things are coming to me to channel? That scares the shit out of me. So I dealt a lot with fear in the beginning of my gift journey, a lot. I mean, I also, because of some of the things I've been through, I also have PTSD. And so it's not as prevalent now because of the healing and, the things I do in therapy and all of that. But and so it was really hard for me to sleep at night already, without a light, because the dark was really scary to me. And this is also why it's so important to be developing gifts from a trauma-informed perspective, because what happens if we're not also doing the trauma work while we're doing this work, while we're doing the psychic work, we project all of our trauma work onto the psychic world. Why? Because the psychic world is the unseen, it's the unknown, and it's an easy place for our trauma to get projected onto, the fear, the anxiety, all of these sorts of things. And so this happens if we're not doing the grounded trauma work, with this too. And so there's that really kind of juicy, grounded perspective of that. And then the second perspective, which isn't as juicy, but is just real as well, is that everybody's going to go through fear with this. That's just a normal thing. And it's going to show up for different people in different ways, the way that the fear comes in, because as I mentioned, you're opening yourself to something that you can't truly understand with your logical mind. And the logical mind, our thinking brain, wants to understand everything to keep us safe from a nervous system perspective. And so if I can't compute in my logical mind, if I can't see the Arcturians here, that creates a lot of space for doubt, for question, for fear in my logical mind. And this is science as well, when we're faced with something that we've never been faced with before, the primal logical left brain is going to kick in our survival response. We're going to go into fight or flight, and then all this fear is going to come up from that fight or flight perspective. And so this happens all the time with gifts.
Do you believe that these beings, all the different kinds we've talked about, are just metaphorical and they're aspects of ourselves? Or do you actually believe that they are personalities and entities?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So, and this is again another question that gets really kind of hazy when we're looking at it from a quantum perspective. And this is something that I'm still chewing on, because there's a spiritual concept, a spiritual teaching that I've been taught, that gets taught everywhere, is that we are everything, right? From a quantum perspective, we are everything. Like I am you and you are me. And so our spirit guides are simply just other versions of ourselves in different timelines. Because when we look at from a quantum physics perspective, there is no past, present, or future. Everything is going simultaneously at once, right? So this is a concept I'm still chewing on of, because when I connect with the galactic beings, it feels very much like I'm connecting with separate, right? Like it's not me. I'm connecting with, but if we look at it from this spiritual teaching, I really am just connecting with the one consciousness, right? The one consciousness that we all exist within, which is where all the psychic information is, right? And then these, different consciousness get projected into different humans and depending upon, the belief system. So this is something that I'm still kind of like feeling, okay, what resonates with me here? Like how, because when I'm inclined to say it's this feeling of like, it really is just a different aspect of consciousness that we're connecting with. But then when I start to really think about that, it's like my human's like, but wait, if I am her and she is me and they are me, and and it gets really, it's a concept that's hard for me to teach from a grounded way. So I don't teach it as much because it's hard for people to understand, if that makes sense.
I think part of why it's challenging is that we're only human. And so our brains can't quite grasp on to infinite concepts.
Right.
And part of why I love astrology is because it really does bring a context to that we're part of this universe. We're not our own. Before I forget, so childhood gifts, psychic gifts, why do some people seem like they're naturals and some people don't? Some people get drawn to this and some people don't. Is there any rhyme or reason for that?
Yeah, so we can look at this from a trauma-informed psychological perspective and then from a quantum perspective. So let's do quantum perspective first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the psychological dynamics. So from a quantum perspective, on a soul level, your soul is going to choose. It's gonna plan everything that you're experiencing in this life, right? Like how you're meant to evolve. And so if you're meant to evolve in a gift way, your soul's going to choose how open you want to come into your gifts and when your gifts are going to come online and what are the things that are going to come up with your gifts. So like I've worked with people not in one-to-one but in development groups where like they're super gifted, super open, but they just like they don't think they can do it, so they never do it. So like this person in particular has been working at a day job for like 20 years and she knows that she's supposed to be using her gifts, but she just can't. Like she's just like I can't do it. I don't think I can. I'm not ready yet, even though she's been working in this way for like 20 years. And so that's her soul's journey. Her soul's journey has chosen to experience that, and for whatever reason, for the lesson that she's meant to learn, whether it be like shining your light and your authenticity and allowing yourself to be seen in your gifts. And so that's going to influence on a quantum level how open you're coming into your gift. So like some people, it's a part of their plan to never tune into this psychic piece of them. Other people, it's a part of their plan to like tune into it for a few years, be super skeptical and shut it off and never do it again, or come back to it when it's a bit more grounded. And so that's from a quantum perspective. So that's going to influence what comes up in your journey, like in your soul journey with your gift. So for me, I deal a lot with fear of judgment. I'm still working through that in my own practice of people judging my channelings and these sorts of things, because sometimes they are esoteric things, esoteric teachings that might not be people have ever heard of. And so I still deal with some of that. With a lot of my students, they deal with not trusting themselves. A lot of I'm making this up, I'm crazy, and that's like the number one thing. And then if we look at this from a trauma-informed psychological perspective, this is a hypothesis that I'm developing as I work with people, and it is going back to this empath thing of the trauma in your childhood actually makes you a better psychic and a better empath, because you have created these survival mechanisms to be able to understand what people are thinking and feeling so that you could stay alive as a child because your parents weren't communicating with you. And this is why I, again, am so passionate about this work, because people begin to develop in a survival response. So people are empaths and psychics in a survival response. And they're like, I'm so drained. Like I was just talking to a psychic. She's like, I'm taking some months off because I'm so drained in this work. I can't do it anymore. And it's not the work, it's the survival response that your body is in that is associated with this decoding and these sorts of things, decoding other people's feelings and thoughts. And so the beliefs or the experiences that somebody has had in childhood can also lead them to want to work in this way. But that's where we have to really tease it apart, right? Because if you're called to your gifts because you need approval that you didn't receive in childhood and you need validation from others that you didn't receive in childhood, guess what? You're going to be burning the F out because you're just doing this for validation and approval. And this really what needs to happen is this sensitive little inner child needs to be loved and seen and, needs to be safe. And so these are a couple of reasons why we can see the different people feeling called and more open.
And with the empaths that, first of all, I think the early childhood trauma creates hypervigilance, right, in the environment. And then the nervous system is on hyper alert. It's actually a brilliance of the body to protect oneself. And those that don't do the nervous system regulation work as adults, what you're talking about, what I'm hearing is that, not only are they looking for validation, but that is why they would then not empower their clients, because they want to feel like the guru or the guide. And then there would be, this can manifest in feelings of insecurity or scarcity. So why would you educate your clients? Because then you'd have none left, this sort of thing. So I think that creating nervous system regulation, self-security, self-assuredness, self-healing would create, more comfort with your gifts, more healthy boundaries to be able to interact in a way that's doable, right? For the nervous system, for the self. And then naturally, when you're coming from that centered place, you want to contribute to others, not take from them, which really is what's happening, right? When you're looking for somebody to look up to, you're taking from them. You're not actually contributing to them. And that's exhausting.
Yes, that's an exhausting dynamic. And also, it's exhausting and I've never worked this way as a psychic, but I've had friends who, they go to psychics and I know people who do lots of readings, and it's no judgment. I mean, it's a little bit of judgment, to be honest, because I'm like, I don't want you to give your power away, right? Like, I don't want you. Yeah, discernment, right? Yeah. And so it's no judgment in that perspective, but I'm just like, it has to be exhausting from a psychic perspective, people coming to you with their questions of like, well, should I take this job or not do this job, or should I do this or should I do that? And that is just taking your power away. It's just taking your power away. And also you're just answering other people's questions, right? Like we're not really, when we're working in that way in the quantum field, just answering questions, we're not really tuning in to the power that our quantum fields have with deeper healing.
Yes. I love this.
Yeah.
When people are seeking to you for the answer, they are dumping their fear and anxiety on you, and you are, enabling them when giving them the answer. And then both people are depleted because no one's actually creating more. It's not actually creating healing, it's creating depletion. And if you're an empath, it's gonna grow within you, that lack, that void, that wound. So I so appreciate everything you're saying. This is such a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea that to be an empath, you are drained, you are, it's hard to connect with people. This is like the disempowered empath, the disempowered way of looking at empaths, because this is the nervous system dysregulation, the unresolved trauma, all of these sorts of things that happen within our energetic fields as sensitive beings. And so we can be empowered as empaths. Like, I truly believe, and this is something that's really starting to come up in my body and in my energy field, is that we are all meant to be these sensitive beings. Like, we're all meant to be feeling, but we don't live in a culture that supports that. And we also are so dysregulated from a culture perspective, like from a that way from a cultural nervous system perspective that we can't be tuning. It's hard for us to really continuously tune into these gifts that we have.
It's the resistance that
Right.
makes it uncomfortable. And resistance is something that I hear a lot from people. How do I protect myself from others and other people's energy? And from what I've recognized through my experience so far, I've seen that for an empath to quote unquote protect him or herself, it's to get bigger, not to protect oneself and shield, but be more you, be more centered in you so that you can just witness rather than take on. So I've seen so much stuff floating around the internet about shielding yourself and creating a bubble around yourself when really you don't want to feel more like you need to hide. But as an empath, get bigger, know yourself more, shine yourself more, and then you can just interact with people as a whole being rather than somebody who's fragile and could be, completely what's the word? Not catapulted, but just collapse by other people's energy. So it's ironic because the antidote is the opposite of what I've seen taught in so many circles.
Yes. And this is like, I mean, this is, I've only ever heard one other teacher teach from this perspective of what you just said and what I'm about to say. Her name is Wendy DeRosa. So if anybody's listening, please go read her work if you identify with an empath, the label of an empath. Because she's super grounded in what she teaches from an energetic perspective about empaths. And what is happening from an empath perspective is if we're not, so you cannot put a bubble of protection around you if you haven't done the deeper trauma work. Why? The reason why you're feeling like you're taking on energy is because you learned somewhere in your life that it was safer to be somebody else and to chameleon to somebody else than it was safer to be you. Right? And so you had to chameleon to get that approval and that love. And so if we're putting the bubble around, yeah, energetically that might be able to work, but you're dealing with your quantum field. You're dealing with solar plexus energy that feels safer being other people. So what happens, because oftentimes empaths as well, and generally just humans, we are not as grounded in our root. So we come out of the root chakra, and there are tons of dynamics that can happen, but this important empath dynamic is we come into the solar plexus, and to ground, we ground into our environment. Like we ground into other people, right? And so we ground into other people's energy, sensing and feeling their energy field and disconnecting from ourselves. And so it's like, oh, I'm feeling Becca's energy and I'm feeling this person's energy and this, well, who am I? Like, what do I actually want? Because I'm chameleoning for everybody. And this is draining for the empath because the bubble isn't going to give you what the deeper trauma work isn't going to give you, which is the safety and security to project your identity from the solar plexus. I walk into a room and Marissa is here. Like my light is here. I'm not gonna hide myself and become like a suction, right? And kind of close myself off. And so I love the way that you shared that because it's so accurate. And I'm so grateful. This gives me hope that you were able to discern that. Because I know that there are so many people walking around like putting up shields and it's just not it. Like we got to do more. You know what I mean?
I'm so inspired by this conversation.
Yes.
So as we're kind of gearing towards the end of our talk, I feel like there's a couple more things I want to touch on. And that's how can you acknowledge what your gifts are, right? Like I know, and let's go over the simple ones, the clairs, but also as you're talking about your modality and your work, what would be the steps of acknowledging this, starting to uncover it? What is the healing work to be done? And what's possible for people to experience when they are embodied in their gifts? Like, what's the world of a psychic and a medium like? Like, what is the benefit? Why would I do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So so we're talking about kind of what's the process psychically. And what was your first question?
So for those who aren't familiar with like the different clairs, like what are the different psychic gifts that we have available to us?
Yeah, so there's 5 ways in which we receive psychic information. So it's going to be clairaudience, which is clear hearing. So this is when you're either physically hearing something in your environment that's not there, or you're hearing thoughts or voices in your head that don't feel like your voices. It can be like your spirit guide voices, or they can like you can be walking and you can just hear like a turn left, and then you turn left and you bump into your partner. You bump into the love of your life or something like that. So that's clairaudience. Clairvoyance is clear seeing. So this is the ability to see things in your physical reality that aren't actually there. And 90% of the time, this is going to come through your third eye. So people, like, you can look and you can see a spirit here, but you don't see it like I would see you standing there. You just see like like an energetic outline of them. So we see most often through our third eye. However, some people can see like, oh, I see a spirit here. It's very rare. Clairsentience is clear feeling. So all the empaths out there that are listening, that is you, clairsentient. You can feel a lot of energy. So this happens in two ways. You can feel and sense energy when you walk into a room. Like you walk into a room and it's like, oh, this room's kind of heavy right now. Or you feel energy in your body. So oftentimes when I'm working with people in readings, I will start to feel energy that they're carrying in their physical body, in my own physical body. And so this can happen with clairsentience. I work with, it depends on how this gift wants to show up for you. If it's like a physical, if you're very sensitive in your physical body to your gifts, to that gift. Then we have clear olfactory, which is clear smelling, which is where you can smell things in your environment that aren't actually there. This gift doesn't show up at all for like any of my students, and it's only shown up for me a number of times throughout my time as a medium, as a psychic medium. But you can smell like cookies. That's happened in a reading before. Grandma's cookies. My brother, who's in spirit, when he first passed away, whenever I smelled cigarette smoke, I used to know like that was kind of him. I would literally be in my car with the door shut. No way that there could be I don't smoke. No way that there could be cigarette smoke, and I would smell like somebody had just smoked in my car. So this is clear olfactory. My mom, before I've been sitting on the couch and I will smell her hairspray. So these are ways that can show up for you. And then, okay, clairsentience, clairvoyance, clairaudience.
Claircognizance.
Thank you. Claircognizance is clear knowing. So this is the hardest clair to develop, and but it's also the funnest clair. So I love working with my students who are very claircognizant, because this is like I just know it. I don't know how I know it, but I just know it. This is why it's so important, again, where we have to develop really deep trust in ourselves, because lots of people are claircognizant. Like your intuition, like I just know this. I just know this partner's right for me, right? I just know I'm supposed to make this investment, right? So these are the 5 ways that you can receive psychic information.
And one discernment, for me, at least with my clairvoyance, it's not that I'm actually seeing it outside my body. It's just like an image in my mind.
Yes.
And I find I've heard a lot of people dismiss their clairaudience because they think it sounds like a different voice in their head. But it's just a thought. It's like, it could be a fleeting thought that if you follow it, you're like, wow, that really was guidance. At least that's my experience.
Yeah. And also clairaudience can be confusing too, because people are like, what is me? Like, I have a voice in my head, and like, what is me and what is guidance? And so what I guide people to do is to begin to connect with their spirit guides, which everybody has guides in the ethereal realms, and ask them to start talking to you through clairaudience. Ask them to put it in a certain part of your mind. So when I first, in your head, so when I first started to develop, my guides, every time that they would send me information, it would come down here, and my left side would tingle. But when I spoke to myself, when it was my voice, it would be right here in the front of my, on my forehead. And so you can start to like, what does it sound like when it's my guidance? And what does it sound like when it's higher guidance? Which kind of leads me into, this reason of why is it important to connect with psychicism. And this is because we live in a quantum reality, but we've been taught that we live in this, like, it's only 3D, like we can only trust what we see. And as we shift consciousness, as we move into like this new way of being, where we are all actually grounded here and connected through love, through our bodies, through this, through pleasure, we are learning that we're not alone. We have guidance that we can tune into within our quantum field. We have this higher state of intuition that is here and available to us for guidance, for our soul purpose, for what is alive for us, what we need to do, where we need to go, all of these sorts of things. It makes life not as hard, because you remember like, oh, I'm supported here by this quantum reality, by my quantum gifts, and I have the answers. That's the biggest thing, right? Like, I have these answers inside of me. If I could show people what I see within the quantum realm, like, it's all here. every answer, everything you've ever desired is all here in your quantum reality. And every timeline around you, you just have to sink into it. And it's like easy as picking it out and being like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I should definitely do that move because yeah, I can see how that, I can feel this in my intuition. And so it's to tune into your psychic gifts is just an easier, effortless way to navigate your life and to navigate you and what you want in your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do want to make one distinction that, there is disparity on this planet and that everyone doesn't have access to everything they want or everything they could desire. And that's one thing in New Age spirituality is like, just like positive mindset your way into abundance and to your lover and to proper treatment. And, there are people on this world suffering and you don't have access. So I just want to make that point. And then the piece about guides. There might be people listening who don't resonate with that word. So if you want to translate what Marissa is so beautifully sharing with us, it could just be information. It could just be guidance. It doesn't have to be from a separate entity. It could just be your own awareness. So I've gone in and out of believing in guides. At this moment, I'm not choosing guides. I'm just choosing the universe or me. So it's interchangeable. So for those who feel a little bit of resistance, just use what makes sense for you. It's still applicable.
Yeah, yeah, and I love both of those notes, the disparity and really including, right, like all people in the suffering and the things that different people are going through. So that is inclusive in my teaching. So thank you for that. And I think that piece of guides is with anything that we see in the spiritual community. Like, and that is the biggest thing that I want people to know is like, you're going to hear things in this podcast from me, or you're going to hear other spiritual people say things and teach things, and it's not going to resonate with you. And that's okay. If on my journey, I would have taken everything that was taught to me, I would not be here teaching in this way that like, I haven't seen anybody teach. I've never seen a psychic teach like this. And so we have to really use that discernment of like, what resonates with me. And so if guides don't resonate with you, maybe God resonates with you. God doesn't resonate with me, and that's okay, right? It's all about like what feels safe in our body, what teaching feels good to us,
And what I love is just being open to shifting and changing. God might resonate for somebody today or not next year, and just trusting that wherever you are in your path is part of your journey and it's valid and it's not wrong and you're not doing it wrong. And just to continue to tap into what Marissa mentioned earlier of like what feels like it's activating, what feels inspiring, what feels expansive. Because when people are asking about how do I know if it's my voice or trauma or worry, if you feel a relaxation of some sort or expansion, that is your truth. Yep. If you're feeling contraction or panic or fear, that is some other protective mechanism. So I always come back to the example is that if you get bad news, but it's true, it's informative, notice that you might not be happy about it, but your body has an expansiveness of some sort first. You might go into contraction after when the awareness of it sets in and it's upsetting. But at first, when you find out, there's some sort of lightness occurs because it's true. So I always use that example. And then, so now that we have the concept of why and who, what are the steps of people acknowledging, like, am I in trauma? Do I have shadow work to do, trauma resolution work to do? Or do I jump into the psychic development work with Marissa first and she'll help me with the trauma? Like, what are the steps that people can take to then get to this ease that you're talking about?
Yes, almost always I spend time with people who come to me for psychic development, and we don't go into psychic development. We actually spend time doing nervous system regulation. And so this is so as right now, and also I also wanted to say I love that you said like the fluidity of thinking, right? And like in what resonates with you, because I'm an open head in human design. And so my not self is pretending to be sure. So I'm always like, I'm fluid, right? Like I'm not 100% certain about things. Like my beliefs change as I change. And so things will resonate with us today that won't resonate with us in a couple of years. And that's okay, right? As we grow. So I love that you pointed that out. So right now, what isn't resonating with me is doing like deep trauma work with people. So I've done it for most of my career as a psychologist. I did deep trauma work with people. And so holding that therapeutic space isn't resonating with me in my practice right now. What is resonating with me is like more somatic, physical work. So I spend a lot of time with people doing just nervous system regulation and understanding groundedness. So like these are the pillars to, so people are like, but I want to develop like my third eye. And I'm like, but we got to ground you first. And we have to be in your body first and regulated before we go into this ethereal realm. So if there's anybody listening who's like, I really want to start, tuning into this or figuring this out, and how do I do this? I would recommend diving into some nervous system regulation work. And there is tons of videos for that on YouTube, and really starting to figure out like, okay, what is a grounding practice for me? What does it feel like to be in my body? What does me feel like? What does my energy feel like? We want you to get very clear on what you feel like before you start feeling what others feel like. And likely if you're listening and you're an empath, you may have been feeling others your whole life. And so we want to, even just this is trauma work by and of itself, right? Like doing the nervous system regulation and feeling what you feel like, what your energy feels like, giving you the time to feel yourself. And so doing this grounded work, in what practices ground you and the nervous system regulation. And then also the trauma work, I feel like I can't give like specific ways to do this because everybody is so different. But if you are an empath and you've been listening to some of these different things that happen with trauma in the empath field, really feeling into like, does any of these things apply to me? Like, does it feel safer for me to be out of my body than it does to be in my body? Was I nurtured as a child? Was I validated as a child? Was I seen as a child? Do I feel safe to be seen in my highest truth? Is a good place to start for empaths for sure. And then if you're like, I still kind of want to easily start tuning into this and start, or I want to start adding a psychic component, you can easily start doing this through meditations or through journaling prompts to, if guides resonate with you, or to just meet this like higher guidance, right? Like calling your intuition in and just journaling with your intuition. I do want to say a note about meditation, to be careful with meditation because it can unground you more depending on the types of meditation that you're doing. So I never recommend that people go in and start doing like a third eye meditation or a crown chakra meditation. Really like meditate earth meditations, like earth, connecting with the earth, connecting with your root, connecting with you and your identity. And pay attention to how you feel when you come out of meditation. If you're feeling like disassociated and not in your body, that's a good way to say, okay, I think this is more disassociative than not.
I love that you said that. With people that are in a PTSD state, it could be really activating to close their eyes and be quiet. So I like to recommend to people dancing, eyes open, walking in the woods, hugging trees, getting on the ground, breath work, eyes open, whatever feels most comfortable, because getting back into the body is first, right? So if your eyes are closed, you're not really, it can feel unsafe if you're in a trauma state. So I love how you express that. Thank you for
Yes.
that.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because that really quickly, I know we're wrapping up here, but that also reminds me of a lot of my students, like when they're working, will close their eyes, and I have them keep their eyes open because of this perspective, this trauma-informed perspective, as well as some of the energetic dynamics that happen when you keep your eyes closed. But most of us generally feel safe in our bodies with our eyes open. And I also, early in my journey, went through that with meditation. I couldn't close my eyes. I was too scared. And so I love that note, just eyes open here in the body, now.
And were there any other steps you wanted to share, or just kind of leave with the somatic work and the nervous system regulation?
Yeah, if you're somebody who is super called to this work, which a lot of people feel called to this work, and it's like this deep desire, but they're scared and they don't know what the heck to do. And there's, they had a bad experience in their childhood, or they're super Christian and, it doesn't feel right. And What I recommend is surrounding yourself with community, like-minded individuals that feel good to you. Because in this community, it can get a little toxic, as we've been talking about, it can get a little weird. And I've definitely been in development groups that don't feel good to me. So finding a community that feels good to you, because if you are like, I'm not gonna, no, I'm crazy, I don't wanna do this, and you're scared, it's just going to create a lot more fear because you're not being witnessed in what's coming up for you. And so finding some sort of community, whether it be a development group or just people that you could talk to, like if you can talk to your friends about it, like, hey, I'm seeing this and what do I do? Because I went through a very long time where I thought I was schizophrenic because I wasn't telling anybody. So sharing with people that you feel safe with is another really key component to help you feel safe, but also to help you start to trust yourself in your gift development as well.
And that's so important just in terms of self-care and life regulation, right? Having like-minded people support you. Witnessing is such an important part of an indigenous culture that we have lost in modern times. And so witnessing helps to integrate and to remind you who you really are. So I love that practice. And I suggest to people, just getting curious. Like, I love the journaling piece. It sounds simple, but what's easy to do is often easy not to do as well. So writing down questions like, what are my gifts? How, what messages am I receiving that I might not be recognizing? Leaving open-ended questions, I find, is a wonderful way to communicate with other realms or other aspects of yourself, whichever verbiage you prefer. And not looking for the answer, just letting those intuitions come. And by tracking it written down, it's easier to not forget, right? Like, a lot of this is like very subtle, so it's easy to ignore. Like, if you have a instinct to turn left, you'd forget about that later if you weren't actually tracking it. So starting to track this and then working with somebody like Marissa or a group, and making sure that you're surrounded by people that you feel more you around, right? That you're not shut down to. So thank you so much for bringing so much wisdom and centeredness and thoughtfulness and really regard for everyone's perspective and experience, and bringing the kind of more tangible pieces to it. And then thank you for sharing so vulnerably about your past and how you got here. I'm re-inspired to, feel into different layers of my gifts. It's been a lifelong journey for me. And I still, change my mind about it. It's like, I'm very fluid with it. So it's been so fun to connect with you. And just to give our listeners context of even how I found you, I live my life like magic, like a prayer. And so I thought, as I created this podcast, it's to debunk the kind of toxic spirituality. And I was like, I wonder if there's a medium out there who I would actually resonate with. And within hours, Marissa showed up in my feed. So there are these quantum entanglements, and everything is energy. So being intentional with your desires, intentional with your goals, intentional with how you express yourself authentically is magic, and it will impact your reality. So keep tracking what parts of you are asking to be seen, getting curious about how you can be met there, and being open to the mentors, the friends, the community that is ready to magnetize towards you, because you are magic and you are energy, and all of this is available to you.
Yes, beautifully said. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And if people want to get in touch with Marissa, she's available on Instagram. I'm going to link her contact information in the episode description. And she works with people through psychic gift development sessions and group work. And if this episode spoke to you, or if you know somebody that this could benefit, please send this episode their way. This is a community that's growing, and I'm so excited to include all of you. And Marissa, thank you for becoming part of my community. I can't wait to have you on again. This was one of the most beautiful episodes I can remember, and absolutely my favorite psychic conversation I've ever had. So I can't wait to see you again.
I'm so honored. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. It feels so good to be here and to be a part of your community.
Thank you. See you next time. Lots of love.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.